Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Inzano. I work for the Chicago Bar Foundation. I want to welcome you today to the voter protection field training. I'm here from the Chicago Bar Foundation because, as you may or may not know, this is one of the events that is part of Pro Bono Week, which is sponsored by the CBA and the CBF. We're very excited that we've had a very successful week full of events. The last event after this one is the Pro Bono Fair, which is tonight, where you can meet with organizations that you can do other pro bono opportunities with throughout the year if you're interested. It is actually here at Kirkland, so you don't have to go very far, from 5 to 7 p.m. And so we hope you can see walk-ins are welcome. There's a flyer at all your tables, so you're welcome to join us for that as well if you'd like. Just some housekeeping. If you do want CLE credit and you haven't checked in with me, at some point before you leave today, I'm going to move to the back. So at some point before you leave today, make sure that you check in with me so that you can get that CLE credit. And then if you also, before you leave, if you have checked in, then you'll want to get your certificate from me, and I'll be in the back with those. So when you leave, you can get your certificate. Another housekeeping matter, we will be taking photos throughout the presentation just for promotional purposes. And so, don't be alarmed. we won't do any close-ups of anyone, but, and then I did want to say, that originally Terry D from McDermott, Will and Emery was going to help, Ami and Ryan present today. But he has injured his Achilles tendon, and so he won't be able to join us today, but we did want to acknowledge his leadership on voter protection issues and that he's really still playing an instrumental role, even if he isn't physically present. Luckily, we have a great pinch hitter in the spirit of the Cubs for today in Michael Paley, who's here from Kirkland and Ellis to talk to you first, and then Ami and Ryan will join in after that. So, Michael?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Yes, as you mentioned, so just to give you a little background, I think it was probably in 2008, Terry reached out to me and told me about this organization, and I was hooked kind of immediately. I thought it was a great idea, something to get involved in. And so back in 2008, he twisted my arm and made me the captain for Lake County, which I did in 2008, again in 2012, and doing it again this year. So anyone who's volunteering to be out in Lake County, that's I welcome anyone who else. We need more people. We've got a lot. We've done a great job. We've got a ton of volunteers. Not surprisingly, a lot of them are signed up for Chicago. So to the extent there's people who are signed up for Chicago and you have some flexibility, we definitely have some needs in some of the collar counties, as well as suburban Cook County. So if you've got a car, you're willing to be mobile a little bit, we'll reach out and just see if we can get some folks in some other areas that have a higher need just based on our experience in the past. So, we talked about the CLE credit. To the extent that you have not signed up for a volunteer shift, let us know. We'd like to, we want to make sure we get everyone signed up, and probably within a week or so, the various captains for the counties will reach out to people and start assigning polling locations and the like. So that's just a little bit of background. So why are we here? We're here to protect everyone's right to vote. This is a completely nonpartisan endeavor. Nobody cares who you're voting for. We just want to make sure that everyone who is entitled to vote gets the opportunity to vote. From my personal experience, having run Lake County, most of the time when there's issues that come up, there's no bad intent. There's just people who are uninformed. Maybe election judges don't know some of the rules, and people are misinformed. And so we're here to kind of help make sure that the right information is given to people at the polling locations, and preserve everyone's right to vote. And that's the fundamental purpose of this organization. So first, just in terms of what we're going to go over today, we're going to talk about the overall structure of election protection, and then much more importantly, Ami and Ryan are going to go through the process, what your role as a field volunteer, what you're expected to do, what your resources are, how you kind of help us make sure that our goals are achieved on election day. There will be a process in terms of recording the information. It's important that when there are issues that come up, that you communicate those, that we're able to actually download that information, and it can be used by the organization in the future to help with problems for future elections. So obviously your primary goal that day is to let's solve the problem, but being able to record the information and collect it and gather it and everything else will also help us for the future. We'll also go through some of the basic nuts and bolts of Illinois election law. Everyone's going to have a handout. All the information, all the answers that you need will be in that handout. But we're going to go through that and make sure that by the end of the day, people know what they're doing and hopefully make election day a smooth one. So who we are, largest nonpartisan voter protection election, 100 organizations across the country, hundreds of thousands of calls are received. We have field volunteers, in 22 states back in 2012. And again, our goal is just to make sure that everyone has the right to vote. It's pretty rare that you're going to have, issues that are systemic. Again, it's kind of individual by individual basis. People who are maybe in the wrong polling location and they're told, you can't vote here, you need to go to another location, when in fact, maybe they are entitled to vote there. So, you'll be there monitoring things, making sure that people's questions are answered. And, there'll be a hotline. You will have, for those people who are field volunteers, you will have, direct contact information with your captain, can answer questions and elevate things as needed. So there's like I said, there's the hotline call center. Some people here probably are going to working in the hotline call center. And then there's also the field volunteers. You've got some nice pictures of people out in the field. What we do, as the captains in the various counties is, based on historical experience. So for me, since I've done Lake County now for 3 different elections, we have an idea of where there are problems, where problems have come up in the past. We can't be everywhere. There's lots and lots of polling locations, but we'll kind of target areas where we've had issues in the past. And we'll have people kind of rove around and go to different polling locations. Usually we work in teams of 2. So some people can be just, first of all, frankly, part of it is just for comfort and safety. Never had any issues in the past, but it's nice to have someone with you to deal with issues as they come up. So lots of people feel more comfortable working in pairs. So that is what we typically do. There are a lot of different organizations. I think Ami will go through some of this, in terms of there's the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. There's, Advancing Justice. I actually am not personally familiar with all these, organizations, but, lots of different groups. And, we also, sometimes there's actually just simply language barrier issues. And so there are different hotlines that can deal with, whether it's, Spanish speaking or other, groups. We've got different hotlines and different phone numbers that people can call to deal with language issues. What else can I tell you guys? Actually, election protection started back in 2000 after all the issues that came up in Florida and everything else, and kind of just again to help everyone resolve problems on election day. And it's become a year-round effort. Frankly, some of the work that we've done has resulted in changes in election laws where we've identified problems in the past. And so we're helping to pass better laws. And, I guess I'll just kind of end it with, first of all, if anybody has any questions about it. But again, everyone's here just to make sure that everyone who is entitled to vote has a right to vote, and that everyone's vote is counted, and that's why we're here. It has nothing to do with who's going to win or who's going to lose. It's just simply giving people the right to cast their vote. I mean, that is the bedrock of our democracy, and I think protecting it is incredibly important. So with that, I'll let me and Ryan take over. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here at Kirkland & Ellis and partnering with both Kirkland and Chicago Bar Foundation and many other partners, even some of whom are in the room today. And can I see a show of hands of how many people are signed up to volunteer with us for election protection on November 8th? How exciting. If anyone has any questions or you want to sign up to volunteer, especially as you heard from Michael, we have a growing need for field volunteers in suburban areas. We can match people up with volunteers who have cars if transportation is an issue. We have a table set up out in front when you came in. If anyone has questions about their volunteer shift or location, if you want to sign up, if you have a friend who does, so don't leave today without checking in with us either over there or with Ryan and myself over here so that we can get you all squared away. We've had a huge surge of volunteer interest, and I wanted to share with you that after every presidential debate, we've seen a huge spike in volunteer registration and also in voter registration in Chicago and all over the state from people from diverse backgrounds and beliefs who are interested in coming together to protect the right to vote. So we really appreciate that. We want to leverage that energy to make sure that we're protecting the right to vote. And we'll share more with you about what the volunteer opportunity is going to look like and your role as a field volunteer. Can everyone hear me okay? As you heard, your important point of contact will be your field captain. And if you'll be finding out soon and get introduced to your field captains, we have at least one captain in the room here today, if maybe more. If we can see a show of hands of a field captain so that some people can match a face with a name. And my colleague Ryan and I will be serving in that role as well. Ryan and I work with Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and doing voting rights work year-round, not only on November 8th, but around the year working on democracy and voting rights initiatives. And when we connect you with the field captain, you'll get an assignment for a specific polling place, in multiple places likely, that you will be covering on the day of. We have field captains for the city of Chicago, suburban Cook County, DuPage County, Lake, Will, and Kane counties. And you will also be paired up with a volunteer partner, as you heard from Michael. And we will assign this depending on where the need is in the community, where there have been civic engagement barriers in the past, or where we expect, as Michael said, sometimes the barriers are unintentional, where we expect a lot of voter crowds or lines to be, where people may have questions that together we can answer. We also will pair up people depending on other characteristics like language capacity, whether someone has a car, those kind of things. And you'll see throughout this presentation a mention of the command center phone number. And so even though you might still be waiting for details about who your field captain is and how to get in touch with that person, this number is really important for all of us to have. You can pull out your phone right now and put it in your phone right now. I promise you it'll be useful on election day, because if you have any issues wherever you are, this is a number you can call to contact your field captain and other folks like us who are involved in election protection who can give you the information that you need. Our role as field volunteers is to improve voter access and assist voters directly. So some of the way we help voters will be direct and some will be indirect. When I say indirect, we may be interacting with election judges, or in other words, poll workers who are on the front lines of democracy on election day. And as a field volunteer, we will be interacting with both the voters and election judges. We're really here to be election protection's eyes and ears and identify and report any problematic practices. Oftentimes the answer to a question will be somewhat based on legal analysis, but also based on the practical situation and the problem solving that we do together with our field captains. So for all of this information we're sharing today, don't feel that you have to memorize it. You are going to have different materials available at your fingertips and plenty of people together in our team to help solve the problems together. The ways that we provide on-site assistance as field volunteers are by making sure that voters know their rights, answering questions that come up, checking voters' registration status and polling place information. You'll get some really specific links and tools related to that shortly. As Michael mentioned, oftentimes and most of the time we'll be paired up as field volunteers. And the rule in Illinois is that to be inside the polling place as a poll watcher, you have to have a credential. And so we have for you these manuals, these field volunteer manuals, and you also should have gotten, along with that manual, a credential for your jurisdiction. If you didn't get it yet, we'll be happy to connect with you and make sure you get it. But this is an example of what a credential looks like. And the rule in Illinois is that there can be one credentialed poll watcher per precinct at a given time. And how this works with our model of having us work in teams of 2 volunteers each is that oftentimes it'll be one of us inside the polling place with a credential, observing the process, maybe interacting with the election judge. If the election judge is comfortable, we may be interacting with the voter directly as well and answering questions or concerns. And the other volunteer in the pair plays a really important role as well to talk to voters who are entering and exiting the polling place, answer any questions, keep an eye on things outside to see how things are going, especially in the instance of a high turnout, of long lines, of voter confusion, anything like that. And we want to make sure that for both sets of volunteers, whether we're inside or outside of the polling place, that we're comfortable with all parts of the process. So that's the goal of today's training. It'll keep your long shift interesting if we swap roles now and then and take turns, and sometimes take the credential and be inside the polling place, sometimes take a turn being outside. And that's the best way to get experience and to get more confidence with the voter issues that come up as well. It's important for us to make ourselves known as far as what we're there to do and what our role is as a poll monitor. And I know you've heard this before, but it can't hurt to reiterate it to anyone who you talk to in this capacity of volunteering on Election Day, to mention that we're with a nonpartisan civic organization. You can feel free to mention you're with Chicago Lawyers Committee or with Election Protection, and say that you're here to help if there are any issues or questions or problems to address, and you're also here to just check out what's going on. You're excited to be involved on Election Day. We want to be approachable as volunteers, and we can be the most useful in our role as advocates if we build rapport with the election judges and with the voters as well. It's good for us to introduce ourselves to the election judges, to find a non-disruptive way to say hello, to let people know what we're doing. It's important to make it clear through what we're saying that we're attorneys or we're legal professionals, we're excited about this work, we've been trained in this area, but also to be approachable and not make it seem like we're there to be a watchdog, or we're there to spy on someone, or we're there to sue someone right away. That's not our role, and that's not how we will start off the interaction. We have an overwhelming rate of success in this kind of problem solving at the polls when we build rapport with the election judges and when we work with them as a team to try to solve any issues that come up. We have also been involved with litigation in the past, and we've been involved with other kinds of hands-on advocacy when needed. And I know that you all are accustomed to that in your other legal work and other areas of the law and of your pro bono and public interest work, that we try to solve the problems in a collaborative way, and then we can always get our field captains and command center involved if we do think something needs to be escalated. Some of the poll workers might not love that we're there, and I'm going to use the terms election judge and poll worker interchangeably. It means the same thing in Illinois, and you might hear it referred to both ways by voters. And some people are used to our presence. They know about election protection. Some people even cheer us on. You all have heard about our National Nonpartisan Election Protection Hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE, that's already up and running and is a really important tool on the day of as well. It's the flip side of what we'll be doing in the field. We have hotline volunteers who will be answering those hotline calls at the call center in downtown Chicago. And I wanted to share with you that we're even getting calls to that hotline now from election judges, from poll workers who want to know more about voting protections in Illinois or want to report an issue to us, which is kind of fascinating. And so we really can be an ally, but that doesn't mean that we're always received well right off the bat. It's nice that our volunteer shifts are long. I think that's really strategic because then we can build that relationship with the election judge. So it's important for us to be proactive. We've talked about that, and an example of what that kind of interaction might look like is displayed here. So when we let voters know, if we're stationed outside the polling place and we let people know that we're here to answer any questions, someone might ask us, can you tell me what ID I need to vote? We're going to walk through some of the nuts and bolts of Illinois election law and voting rights today, but also when in doubt, one of the resources that's going to be really helpful for all of us is this field volunteer manual that you have all received. And in that, I want to walk you through a little bit, the very front part, and it's in a nice pocket here, learning the tips from the expert veterans of election protection who have been at this for years, and I really appreciate learning their tips. You may want to take in the whole notebook with you. You may just be in a rush and a pinch want to grab this top issues page, and that'll answer a lot of the questions that you may have or that voters may have. We will make sure to send you links later because all of this is also available online. It's public information. We can share it with anyone as well. And then something great about this resource is that there is the backside to it. So it has the top issues to field on one side, and the back side is some things to remember about entering the polling place, the kinds of issues that we should look out for. And when in doubt, to call the command center. It has a command center's phone number. And so these resources are all here, and it will walk us through what to do when voters ask us questions. There are some more detailed documents, too, that we'll dig into a little bit later. And a lot of the times you'll find the answers that you need even just on this one piece of paper. You've heard about the command center now, and that will be our first thing that we do when we need to report issues or problems that we see is to call the command center. That's how we reach our field captain. We also ourselves as field volunteers will be calling the hotline, especially if we're logging incidents that have been resolved. So if we were able to do problem solving on our own, we felt comfortable answering the voters' questions or negotiating something with the election judge, we were able to resolve a problem. We want to keep the record for posterity's sake in case anyone is ever wondering about it later. Then we can call the hotline, Election Protection Hotline, 866-HOUR-VOTE to log incidents. And it would be a hotline volunteer that's taking your call, logging it into a database, asking you questions about the relevant facts. If you can't get through, you also can complete an incident log form, which is in your manual as well. And just think of that as a backup. You don't need to be writing numerous long reports all day long as a field volunteer. You're really there to do hands-on, interactive type of volunteer work. But it can be helpful to record certain information in the incident log that's in your manual as a backup plan if the phones get jammed or you encounter any other kind of difficulty, or a place to take notes if you are trying to store some notes of what you might tell your field captain when you get them on the phone. And it will be, when you call the command center, you'll get to the field captains. When you call 866-HOUR-VOTE, you will get to Illinois hotline volunteers who are trained in Illinois law, just like you're getting trained in Illinois law. So don't think that you're going to be connected with someone who has no idea what you're talking about. And this is the hotline number is good to put in your phone as well, so please do that. So you might wonder why it's important to log the incidents and to call the hotline number and report all of the details to the hotline when you get a moment of downtime in your field volunteering. And it's really important for various reasons, especially because, as I mentioned, our voting rights work and our democracy work is year-round. It happens all the time, even when it's not a presidential election coming up. And those details help us to advocate to election officials, which is a big part of our work, and it's part of our constructive problem-solving model that we often are able to work things out with election officials behind the scenes, even short of litigation or even short of anything that makes its way to the media. And we also are able to use that data to capture trends of how voters may be having a harder or easier time with certain aspects of the voting process over time. We get data on demographics as well, which we'll walk you through a little bit later in just a moment. And we do see some of the demographic trends of some of the historically disenfranchised communities, communities of color, low-income communities, and others who have a disproportionate burden to bear when it comes to the voting barriers and formalities that face all of us. And there has been some alleviation of that too in Illinois and Chicago. There have been some important reforms and changes and improvements to the voting system to make it more modern, to make it more clear and consistent. And sometimes in Illinois, it's not always a bad story. It's not always a sad story of what's happening at the polls. Sometimes we're going to get inspiring examples of something that was fixed correctly. We want to make sure to at least get some basic information when there are issues we're observing at the polls. Without this basic information, it's hard for a field captain or a hotline person who's answering your call to really help with any further follow-up. So at the very least, we need to convey and record the polling place where we were when the incident happened, the name and address. In some places, it's also important to record the ward or township. In the city of Chicago, it would be the ward. In the suburbs, it would typically be a township. And then also the precinct number is important to take a note of too, because some of the election officials won't really have all the addresses of places memorized, but they could look up their list and say, okay, if you saw a certain issue or barrier at this precinct, I can get an investigator out there. I can get someone else out there to resolve the problem. Anything else? I mean, use common sense about any other details that are required to follow up. And so the logical questions that we would want to know if we were on the hotline or if we had to escalate an issue to an election official. So we may want to know, was the problem resolved? How many people were affected by this problem? What kind of machine or ballot or paperwork was at issue? Those kinds of things. And don't feel like any of these are dumb questions for us to ask a voter or an election judge, because they're all really important for us to then take it to the next level of problem solving. I wanted to talk everyone through a little bit how we might approach a conversation about asking a voter about the race that he or she identifies with. So we talked about how, I mentioned on the slide, how a voter's race is also important information to capture if it's a voter-specific issue that we're looking at. And one way that we can, in practice, feel comfortable with asking about this that's worked out well with voters is to say, we're trying to better understand which communities are affected by these issues. Would you mind sharing with me what race or ethnicity you identify with? And it's one of the factors that the courts look at in deciding whether certain voting protocols, either barriers or reforms or access tools, whether they're constitutional, whether they're necessary, whether they tend to affect certain groups more than others. And we don't necessarily need to do the complex task of having to guess a person's race. We can phrase it in this way and have people respond in the way that they are comfortable with. We've seen issues before where certain racial groups are targeted by different voter suppression measures. That's an example that you see here of a billboard that was put up in Ohio. We've seen these kinds of instances closer to home as well. And we would rather not jump to conclusions about why tools like this are used, or why, in some cases, misinformation might be shared to voters. For example, someone might get a message saying, Election Day has changed, vote on Wednesday, November 9th instead of today. Well, I, as a voting rights attorney, don't want to start out assuming what the intent was behind that voter suppression measure or that confusing message. And so the more information we gather about who was affected by that, who was confused by that, what was their experience, that'll help us to take the next steps to follow up. Actually, when we collected data, we as a National Election Protection Coalition, when we collected such data about the impact and experiences with billboards like this, we've actually then had more success, legally speaking and from a media point of view and negotiation point of view, in trying to get that fixed and taken down for the future. So, especially for some of the folks in the room who have been involved with election protection before, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what additional information should we jot down if we're in the field, people are experiencing a situation where they're having a question about voter ID, and what else should I find out from the voter in order to have the information I need to call my field captain at the command center to take action and resolve this problem. So I'd love to hear from anyone, and you can press the mic on-off button so that we can hear you. That would be great. Any thoughts? We see here the voter's name, phone number, Cicero, Illinois, that it's generally a voter ID type of issue of a voter ID not being accepted. Even if you haven't volunteered before, I'm sure you have ideas about what else would be useful for me to find out from the voter. Yes, in the back? Okay, you said the method of registration that was used. I think that's a good point. We would want to find out, why is it that the person is being asked for an ID? We're going to talk soon about what ID requirements are and the fact that typically in Illinois an ID is not required in order to vote. But if someone's trying to register for the first time using a tool called Election Day registration, it could be that they do need to show an ID. We don't know right now. We just don't have enough information. So why was the ID being asked for? That's an important thing to find out. What else should I ask a voter, or should I try to observe about the situation to try to solve the problem?
What type of ID did they attempt to use that was rejected? Great.
That would be important as well. What type of ID? There are various different types of ID. Anyone else can chime in?
When did they last vote? Because sometimes you're not on the electronic rolls if you haven't voted in a while.
Okay, when did they last vote? Were you able to vote here before? Does this surprise you that this happened? Or do you usually vote here? I think those are all good things to ask. And here's a little bit more about the additional detail that we would want to know from the voter so that a hotline volunteer or a field captain or someone else could help you resolve this issue. We would want to know the specific address of where the voter was. So the town is just way too general, and an election official or a field captain wouldn't really be able to do much follow-up on that, any issues happening in that site, unless we knew more about the address. Like we talked about, also defining it further by saying the township and precinct number would be helpful. Again, townships are just the levels of government, the districts that are described in the suburbs, and then we would use the word ward in City of Chicago. And then finding out more about why is it the person needed ID? Well, in this case, it was because the voter is voting for the first time using Election Day registration. He used a passport as an identification. And here's some more information you see on the slide about what happened after the field volunteer spoke with the election judge, explained the situation, asked the election judge to review the rules, and then ended up working out in the end that the voter was able to use the ID appropriately. And this was an example of something that was resolved by a field volunteer asking more questions and advocating to the election judge. So we've talked about different things we need to bring into the polling place so that we can be most effective in collecting the data. And so here's a list for you. No t-shirts yet, but they should be coming soon. I'm checking the mail every day to find these t-shirts that I can get to you. And it's important to also take the field volunteer manual, which we talked about, that you have here. That has important information in it that you can pull out if the whole manual feels too bulky for you to take everywhere. You have to take your credentials with you. You just take all the credentials that you have, or let us know if you think you need more, because at some polling places, the election judges will take the credentials from you, and it may not be the easiest thing to try to get it back. And you will be going to multiple places in your jurisdiction to monitor the polls. The top issues and the FAQs are important documents. I talked to you about the top issues document. That's the one pager. And then also in your manual is a FAQ document that's more like 10 pages. And so that has more details in it if you needed it. You don't have this yet, but you will have emailed to you your poll assignment from your captain. You could bring that with you as a hard copy or have it handy in your phone, whatever's easier for you. And speaking of your phone, make sure to bring your phone and your charger. It's a long volunteer shift, which we appreciate you all generously signing up for, and it is more effective to have that long of shifts, but it also means it's good to have a charger with you. The phone is really important on the day of. I've resolved a lot of election issues in my work over text and cell phone calls, and so please make sure to bring that. Layers of clothing, snacks and water would be good. Be comfortable. It's good for us to be professional if that is comfortable, but to not we don't need to go to great lengths to wear a suit and be uncomfortable during the day, because it's more important that we are comfortable to do the hands-on work for our whole shift. Your incident log is in your manual as well, and bring extra paper and pens. You know, one thing to say too about clothing, you can wear our t-shirt if you want, and you don't have to, but one thing we do not want you to wear is any kind of partisan clothing or buttons or hats. So in addition to the fact that it's not allowed in the polling place, which we'll talk about soon, that's a violation of the electioneering restrictions, but we also as Election Protection are so proud and sincere about the fact that we're nonpartisan. We're really bringing together a diversity of attorneys who care about voter access. And so let's not confuse that message or undermine our good work and our credibility by bringing any of that partisan material with us. And if anyone has questions about that, please let me know. I wanted to just go over some additional notes with you. In Illinois, poll watchers are primarily there to observe the elections, if you look at the election code and what it says. Now, we do think that there are ways that we can very comfortably act within that role, but still be of assistance to voters and clear things up for election judges who may not be familiar with all of the rules and all of the developments in the rules. But it's important for us to respect that process of what the rules allow in Illinois. When in doubt, ask us or ask your field captain. It's important for us to, we talked about being nonpartisan, but also you're going to hear comments from voters and election judges. If it rises to the level of electioneering or voter intimidation, we need to do something about it. But there are also things that may not be illegal, but still may be provocative, still may make us think or cause a reaction in us on our own personal time. But in our volunteering capacity as election protection, I recommend that the best practice to have success in what we're trying to do to protect voter rights is to not share our political beliefs with voters or other volunteers, but also to not be reactive to what other people are saying or doing, unless it's specifically trying to solve a problem from the perspective of election protection. You know to call the command center to report any problems, call the hotline to log incidents. We're trained volunteers, so we are not acting as attorneys who are representing voters in this capacity of being field volunteers. We can refer to ourselves as legal volunteers or trained volunteers. We're not creating an attorney-client relationship through this process. And, the last point talks about not getting into arguments with election judges. It's important to, again, know our role of primarily to observe and assist during the elections. If something happens that starts to feel contentious, the best rate of success we have is to then bring in the field captain over the phone and see what we need to do together to solve the problem. We don't want anyone to be in any kind of scary situations or aggressive situations with a voter, with an election judge, with a fellow poll watcher who might not be as mindful of all of these rules and best practices like we are being. If that I don't know that will happen, but if it does happen, make sure to try to keep your cool, be polite and constructive. I wanted to share with you on that note some of the information we're receiving from our partners in other parts of the country and even locally about how to best address some of the conversation we're hearing about voter intimidation that may happen on Election Day. What are the claims of rigged elections that we're hearing in the news and in other places, and is that going to get people riled up at the polls, and how do we respond to that? So I wanted to share with you some interesting research that we learned. So all voters across the country, including people who vote Democrat, including people who vote Republican, including people who are planning to vote for each party's respective presidential candidate, feel comfortable that their own right to vote is going to be okay in this current election, and that we will be safe and secure in voting the way that we want to, and that it won't be manipulated. So what was interesting to me about that research is that people on an individual level, regardless of their party affiliation, feel comfortable about the security and the integrity of the voting process. But where it starts to break down is that people, both Democrats and Republicans, don't necessarily feel comfortable or reassured knowing, is some other voter in some other community or some other part of the country also going to be participating in a fair election? And that's where some people have doubts. That's where some people have doubts about our election system. And so it's important for us to help voters feel comfortable and secure about their own voting process. And a lot of voters already do. And so know that going into the day of, don't be overly tense or looking out for Don't be too paranoid or concerned about problems. Hopefully voters will feel comfortable. And then as I shared with you, election protection really does bring people together. We've also been talking to election administrators and candidates, officials, election officials, county clerks from both parties who feel proud of their work to ensure voter access and ensure integrity of the system. That's something that is the dynamic here in Illinois. Not 100% of the time, but the large majority of the time. And so we're in a good climate here for that reason. In the rare situation that you do encounter an intimidating, or even on the very, very rare chance that you encountered something violent, call your captain or your election protection hotline. Have other election officials on site help you. I wanted to ask Dan to chime in about some of the experience relating to that in the election protection work.
I would, I guess, second your observation that in general there aren't a lot of intimidation or nefarious actions that are getting in the way of voting. By and large, what we're going to be dealing with are people who've been mistakenly taken off the roll. They're in the wrong location. An election judge hasn't been properly trained and is applying the wrong rules. That's the bread and butter of what we'll be dealing with. There's no telling whether this election will be different or not, and in any there could always be a situation where there's someone acting nefariously, some loose cannon has gone off. Historically, we've seen, I know in northern Indiana there were incidents in an election a couple cycles ago of people setting up shop outside of a precinct in Gary in a big truck with baseball bats and taking pictures of everybody as they went into the polling place. And the hotline was called. The hotline then reached out to the election officials in Lake County, and a Lake County sheriff's officer was there in 10 minutes. And as soon as the sheriff's car pulled up, the pickup truck left and wasn't seen again. Now, there's issues with sending police officers into some of these polling places because that has different effects. In Illinois, we have, at least in Cook County, and all of Illinois, I guess, the Attorney General's office has attorneys who work for the AG's office are on call, and they have been very responsive in the past. When incidents come up, we can dispatch. We can call the AG's office. They find who on their team is closest, get them to the site, and when we've had issues in the past, they've resolved them very promptly. They carry a little more authority than we do with our T-shirts saying voter protection. So it's good to run that up. And often the election judges in place themselves. If you have an experienced election judge staffed to that precinct and they see funny business, I've seen people come out and like lay down the law. They can kick anybody out of there if they want to, which is another reason to be friendly with them. And if someone is in there making a little trouble, making excessive challenges or causing a stir, they can have that person booted. So that's, those are the experiences we've had. They've been rare, but when they've happened, there are avenues for addressing them, short of fisticuffs.
That's really helpful, and also shows us the kind of insight we can get from our field captains. Many of you will actually be working with Dan, and you could call him and get assistance with bringing in the Attorney General's office or whoever else is needed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ryan Cortazar, our Harvard Legal Fellow at Chicago Lawyers Committee, to talk about the next part of the presentation.
Hello, so I'm going to talk about the tools and resources, which is a lot of what you have in front of you today, so that when you're in the field, you're prepared and ready and know the best way to help anybody who comes in your circle of influence. There are 4 types of resources. The first one is top issues and FAQs, and that's your printed resources that you have in front of you. It's 2 separate documents that have different levels of specificity for dealing with what we expect you to encounter on election day. The second is electronic resources, which you probably have in your pockets, which are your smartphones, which you'll use to look at the state election website as well as county websites, because sometimes there's a gap between what you can get through those websites, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The third is your command center and your field captain. If those 2 fail you, you're going to want to call your command center, your field captain, who will be able to assist you if you have problems with that, or also if it's something that you can't deal with just by yourself. If it's a larger issue, a systemic issue, then you're going to want to call your command center or field captain to maybe contact the central election authority for where you're stationed, or act as a liaison between them and the election judges, depending on how things are going. And finally, if you're having a hard time getting through to your command center or field captain, which sometimes happens, say the line's busy or they're just not answering because maybe they're getting inundated with a lot of other calls, then you can just call 866-R-VOTE and they'll route you through. It should go straight to our call center anyways, but maybe it won't go to your captain. It might go to another worker who will be able to assist you in that. So the first resource that I talked about electronically is the state's election website. If you pull out your phones, you're probably going to want to bookmark this link. It's www.ova.elections.il.gov. And when you're going to use this is if somebody comes up to you and they're having a registration problem. This is really going to help. Unfortunately, recently after voter registration closed, I believe it was last week, they have this sign up now. But if you go to the top, particularly on the mobile site, I think it's more centrally located. Am I registered to vote in Illinois? If you click on that, it'll take you through to a number of fields. Actually, maybe I just want to get this out because it might be good to do a demonstration of how this works. And you can also play along on your phones to do this. Okay, it doesn't want to pull up for me. It's not pulling up for anyone?
Without the www.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay. Okay, so I'll put in my information so you can see what happens once you have this all in.
I also want to point out that voter registration is not closed for this election, despite what the website says. So people can still register using election day registration on the day of or other tools. It's not as relevant for you to know because we will be volunteering as field volunteers on the day of. But just so you know, voter registration in Illinois is still up, even though we can't do it online anymore.
Yeah, so once you put it all in, it really has a wealth of information. It's not just your polling place, but it also has district information. So if you want to fill out a ticket to escalate this up to Election Central, it'll have my precinct number, ward, cook, all this type of information that you're going to want to have. You can see the ward there at the bottom. Sometimes it's hard to see when there's this much information, but if you have to fill out a ticket, that will be helpful for you. Okay. The next slide. So one of the problems with that, if you noticed, I had to put in my date of birth, I had to put in my name, I had to put in a lot of information. If you encounter a voter who does not want to give that to you because they just see you as a person standing there in a black and white t-shirt, then you can go to the local websites, which a lot of times require less information. So you can see, like, even though on the Chicago website they'll ask you for your name, they won't ask you for your birth date or anything that might make people a little bit wary. Also, these are the desktop websites, but I went to some of these today, and if you go to them, it goes straight into their elections central, so you don't have to navigate through drop-down boxes, although sometimes if you're doing it on a computer, it's not always front and center on their website. If you go to their mobile sites, it should be front and center. If not, you might have to do a little bit more sleuthing. All right, so these are the two main documents that you're going to use. Ami showed you the top issues to field, but I want to talk about that in conjunction with the frequently asked questions document, which is your 10-page document, and that's going to have a lot more specific information for giving to people if they have a more quirkier problem. And so what we're going to do is, why don't we divide up these questions and everyone can take a look and try to answer one of them. Why don't the first 2 rows do question 1, the 3rd row do question 2, the 4th row do question 3, and then the people in the back can do question 4. I want to emphasize that you should be first going to top issues to field, because it's just it's an easier document to navigate as a hard copy. The FAQs is really great for the people in our command center because we have the links that go straight to the questions. But if you're out in the field, it's much easier to look at one sheet and hopefully it has your answer. Some of these questions will not have that answer, so you will have to go to the frequently asked questions. Okay. Does everybody have an answer in every row? Well, let's hope for that. What time can I vote on election day? First 2 rows. You have the easiest question.
So it says that the polls have to be open at 6 a.m., and if you're in line by 7, then you can vote.
Great. All right, row number 3. What ID do you need to vote?
You only need an ID in certain situations that are listed on number 2 of the top issues.
Right. Great.
And then number 5 in the FAQ tells you what the specific requirements are if you fall into one of those exceptions.
Great. In row 4, somebody requested but didn't send in a mail-in ballot. What can they do? Yes.
About that. Sorry. So you go up, or an individual goes up and just provides their name, and if they're on the list, then the person who's doing the check-ins, I guess, just checks their name off, and they can't ask for any supporting identification.
That's right. Yes. There's no voter ID requirement in Illinois. Voters can be challenged by people in the polling place, I believe, if they think that, say, as the neighbor, like, I don't know, this person moved, they shouldn't be voting here. Then that can happen.
Yeah, I would love to talk a little bit more about that. So another poll watcher, for example, could challenge and could say, I don't think that person's who they say they are. The laws prevent a challenger from challenging every single voter who's in the line, or challenging every voter of a certain race, or doing something else like that in a blanket fashion. And so we should keep an eye out for that. We do have a procedure where we have to, and you all probably remember from your voting experience, where we have to sign in, and the election judge compares signatures. And so actually, for me, it had been so long since I had registered to vote and signed, I guess my signature changed over time, and the election judge kind of challenged me and said, this looks different, and we talked about it. And I mean, I had an ID with me, but for a lot of the communities that we serve, that's not necessarily a given. So actually, the election judge did feel comfortable with me going forward and voting, and it was a friendly conversation. But it could happen that someone wants more information or validation, and that's part of the reason that we're doing the poll monitoring, is to keep an eye out for whether that's being done in a fair manner or whether it's being done in a way that's preventing someone from voting.
And another thing to keep in mind, if something like this happens, or if other things involving provisional ballots come up, is that you want to stress to voters who might feel like they're being pressured into voting a provisional ballot that that is their last resort. If there's any other way that they can vote by taking advantage of Election Day registration, even if they have to go home, if they have the ability to do so, to get ID if they don't have it on them, then that's preferable to voting a provisional ballot, because provisional ballots are not always counted. So sometimes election judges, in the haste of the day, if they have a long line, they might want to try to get people to vote provisional ballots, but we want to stress that that is a last resort. So going back to question number 3, if somebody requested but didn't send in a mail-in ballot, what can they do? Yes.
They can bring the ballot with them, or file an affidavit saying that they didn't vote, or provide some sort of status that's available on the website that say the ballot had not been received.
Great. And finally, for the people in the back, if my father doesn't speak English, may I assist him in voting? Yes. Okay, great. And finally, we want to go over what happens when you need to call your command center. There are specific instances that I talk about. A lot of them are systemic. Sometimes they're just egregious. But in these situations, you definitely want to call your captain and get further help, because it might require addressing something with the election central for that authority. First is broken machines. And a machine can be an electronic voting machine. It might also be the ballot counter. Or it might be in a lot of these places, you're going to have electronic poll books. So if an electronic poll book goes down and they can't sign in voters who are registered, or they can't register new voters, you're going to want to let your captain know. Election judges are giving wrong info. As I mentioned, they might be hassled, they might be new, or they might be old and the laws have changed. This is our first election first general election where we're going to have Election Day registration. So I know that all the election judges have gotten special training on that this year for dealing with that, but if what they're saying isn't right, then you want to contact your captain. Intimidating flyers or police presence, that kind of speaks for itself, but maybe not. It might seem to certain communities that having a police presence is not going to have suppressive effects, but for other communities, or if there are a lot of police in an area, that might make people feel twice about voting. For the same reason that you saw that billboard that said voting is a felony, on its face it might not seem so bad, but when you realize that it's only targeted at groups of color, the egregiousness kind of pops out at you. If there are multiple voters reporting they are not on the rolls, that suggests that there might be something wrong with their electronic poll book. So you want to report that as well. High use of provisional ballots, I think I already went over that. If polls open late or close early, that's like an immediate red flag. We talked about in the previous exercise that if somebody's in line, they can vote. They're not allowed to just say it's 7 o'clock, we're shutting down now. They've had a long day. They've been there since 6 a.m. A lot of these people aren't working in shifts. So emotionally it might be understandable, but legally it's not. Voters who don't speak English are having issues. This is something that does come up particularly in suburban Cook County as population demographics change, but maybe the election judges aren't changing because they just kind of go every election cycle. They might not be used to new language requirements that are being triggered by those changing demographics. Ami, did you have any specific instances? Okay. And if the polling place is not physically accessible, what we have here is a step without a ramp. That's pretty obvious, even if it's just one step, somebody can't get up that. But there are other issues with accessibility. Maybe you have a ramp. If you were in Chicago a couple of years ago, they had a private company install all the ramps on sidewalks, but they were too steep. That's still an accessibility issue. Even though there's a ramp, if somebody can't get their chair up the ramp or can't pivot it to go into a doorway because the angle of entry is too acute, that's a problem as well, and we would want to know about that. And finally, I believe that Dan has another instance of.
I just wanted to share a couple of situations when someone calling the command center led to a bigger solution than just what was happening in that polling place. There was one time, I think it was just the last midterm election. There were a couple calls. We kept getting recurring calls in a certain ward where the judges were giving the same wrong advice, and we found there were some errors in their own guidebooks. So we were able to contact the city election officials, and they sent out emails to all their workers with the correction. So sometimes something you're seeing that might be sporadic is actually a symptom of a larger problem. On top of that, we just have access to resources in the command center that you won't have in the field. So we can call the AG. We can call the election official if maybe there's a insufficient number of people of written ballots in a particular ward. We've had that happen before, where one precinct reported that they were low on written ballots because people can vote written if they don't want to vote machines. And then we found that actually there had been a bad distribution in that entire ward. So we had to contact the election officials so they could do a corrective matter that covered the whole area. So anything like that might just seem like a one-off to you, if it fits in the category listed on this slide, please call the command center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the ID issue, again, with the EDR, we're expecting that that might be an issue because in suburban Cook County, they're going to have ID scanners, which are great devices in terms of cutting down on the line, because it will import people's state ID information directly into their registration database, and it'll cut down on time. But the problem that might have is that depending on how it comes out in terms of signage, how the election judges are communicating the role of that technology to the voter, some voters might think that they have to have that identification in order to vote, and they do not have to have a state ID to vote or to even register for Election Day registration. So that's important information that you'll also want to communicate. And if you see that happening a lot, call your call center, and we can we'll contact the Election Central for your jurisdiction. And so that's the end of my part. So Ami's going to come back and talk a little bit more about Illinois election law.
We had instances in this past primary election, even before I joined Chicago Lawyers Committee relatively recently. I've been doing voting rights work for the last several elections, including poll monitoring in the primary election. And there were parts of city of Chicago and other parts of the state that ran out of paper ballots. And in the city, it was more of a one-off fluke and still something that did need to be addressed right away with the election officials. In some other parts of the state, it was actually something that the election officials were bragging about before the election, that we hope we have such great turnout that we run out of everything, and it's a little hard to understand why they planned the way they did, but they actually ran out of paper ballots then, and we got a lot of calls to our hotline on that day. All the more reason we need a robust field volunteer force to try to address these issues and solve these issues right away. So let's talk about some of these terms that we've been hearing today. Wanted to lay out for you, they're usually simpler than they seem, and there are usually multiple terms for the same thing. And so ask questions anytime now, or to your captain, or to us, or on the day of to an election judge, or give one of us a call to let us know what your confusion might be, because sometimes we unintentionally use this jargon, and if it trips us up, imagine how the voter feels and might get confused by the process. So here are just some terms for you to look back at whenever you have questions as you're going through your materials. In Illinois now, the term is mail-in ballots, but the old term was absentee ballots. It's the same thing. People may refer to it different ways. People don't need a special or exceptional excuse in order to get a mail-in ballot, and so someone shouldn't be regarded with suspicion if they had a mail-in ballot issue. We talked about Election Day registration. That's a relatively new voter access tool in Illinois. It's been part of the law for over a year, but this is, as Ryan mentioned, this is the first general presidential election where Election Day registration will be used. Over 100,000 voters used it in Illinois in the primary election. And of course, we expect an even bigger turnout on November 8th. A lot of people will be using this tool. Chicago Lawyers Committee has also been involved in litigation challenging the constitutionality of Election Day registration. We've been defending that important voter access tool. And the thing for you all to know is that Election Day registration will go forward on November 8th, even though the issue is still being considered in detail by the courts, by the Seventh Circuit, who will take up this issue after the election. And in all of the places where we will be field volunteers, Election Day registration will be available in each and every polling place, or at least it should be. So it's something to keep an eye out for as well. There are other parts of the state where the rules are a little bit different, and someone may have to go to their county courthouse, for example, to access Election Day registration. But in our areas, our jurisdictions, it should be available in each polling place. We talked about election officials. These might be people who are at the headquarters of the different election administration offices. It could be a county or a state employee who has authority over elections. In some places, that's called a county clerk or the president or a personnel of Chicago Board of Elections, for example. We talked about a precinct or a polling place, so that's where a person is assigned on election day. Raise your hands if you are signed up to do field volunteering in the city of Chicago. So it's a lot of people here. And as you probably know, sometimes in the city and in some other locations as well, in one polling place, in one address, there might be multiple different precincts. And sometimes we're asked the question as voters of which precinct are you with? And that determines which line we should be in. And we might actually have shown up to the right address, but we might be in the wrong line or the wrong part of the room of that location and then get tripped up or might even think that we're not correctly registered even though we are. And so keep in mind that voters may be confused about that distinction as well. All of us are poll monitors or poll watchers. We have poll watching credentials. You heard about that. I showed you what a city credential looks like. The credentials are different for different jurisdictions. It's a good thing to keep in your manual, but it may not be in there yet unless you already picked it up. If you haven't picked it up, they are available here for City of Chicago, Suburban Cook County, and Lake County. And the other jurisdiction credentials are coming in, and we'll make sure to connect with you if that's still something you need that you don't have yet, or the field captain or one of us from Chicago Lawyers Committee will provide that to you. And in order to use this and be a poll watcher or a poll monitor, which is the same thing, and also the same thing as a field volunteer, in order to use that, we have to sign, you may have seen here, it says that we're a registered voter in Illinois. And so we do have to be a registered voter in Illinois to use this and to be inside the polling place. If you are signed up for field volunteering and you're not a registered voter in Illinois, come talk to us, and we're happy to figure out what role makes sense for you. And in I think we talked about the fact that in any given location at a given time, there can be one poll watcher with a credential from a particular organization in the precinct at a given time. So when we're in pairs, then that's why we split up responsibility inside and outside the polling place. We have a question in the back. Right. So the question in the back was about whether that requirement or the limit of one poll watcher per location is per precinct or polling place. It is per precinct. So if there are multiple precincts within one polling place, within one building, for example, the church down the street where I go to vote, then there could be two people from our organization with our credentials in the two different precincts. It might be the two parts of the room in that one location, and that's fine. We may have to explain that to the election judge if they are concerned about it, but that is fine. It's one person per precinct, one poll watcher per precinct. An election judge, or in other words, a poll worker, is someone who's hired by the county to work on the team managing the polling place. These are paid employees. They're paid temporary employees who work a really long day, who work really long hours, but they're not volunteers. They are people who are required to go through training. Some of them have done this work for many years. We talked about a provisional ballot a few times, and it's something important to know is that it should be an absolute last resort for a voter to use a provisional ballot. Provisional ballots are typically not counted, and so in order for a voter to be able to make their voice count, they would need to use a regular ballot. The reason this may come up in your field work is because there may be instances where an election judge isn't really sure about whether a person is registered. Dan Feeney mentioned there may be instances where something's off with the registration records or the electronic poll book, and numerous people in the place are not showing up as being correctly registered there. And an election judge's temptation may be to say, oh, we have a lot of lines and a lot of things to deal with on election day, just go ahead and fill out a provisional ballot and then you'll be fine. And it's important for us to let voters know and let election judges know that those typically don't get counted. If there is any legal ground for the person to vote a regular ballot, then that's what we want to advocate for so that their voice can be counted on election day. We also talked about voting machines, which there are different types of machines and equipment inside the polling place. So be aware of that. There are electronic voting machines, also in some places called touchscreen machines. That's one of our options to vote. We don't have to vote that way. We can also vote using a regular paper ballot, which we have a sample of over here and we'll show you shortly, or we can use the electronic machines. Another type of machine in the polling place is a scanner that counts the paper ballots, where we insert our paper ballot when we're finished. And there are also electronic poll books that help people check in at various precincts. And something to know is that there are lots of different types of electronic equipment, but things that relate to the voting process are offline machines. They're electronic, but they're not online. And so that's another thing important to know if voters or poll watchers or anyone else is concerned about the security of our elections. In Illinois, we have over 100 election jurisdictions that each use different procedures and sometimes different equipment. And these are all offline devices. So for better or worse, we have a lot of diverse offline equipment recording our votes in Illinois, which means that even though we have heard about hacking of some of the registration databases and some of the other information, which we hope that more resources are put into beefing up that security, but there's no possibility of manipulating the way that each of us votes because of the way the machines are in Illinois. Now we're going to go through this next part really quickly, and that's intentionally because we want to focus more on putting this information together and how it looks in practice, and don't want anyone to feel that we have to memorize this information, because we can still be a really effective poll watcher regardless. We may hear from voters about not being sure that they're registered correctly, or hearing from election judges that they're not registered correctly. That could be for a lot of reasons. It could be because the person is at the wrong place, didn't register at all, which, as we heard, is not a total impediment. If we're because of Illinois having election day registration, the person can still vote. It's just a matter of how they vote, what they have to fill out. And people who moved recently, which does come up for a lot of people in the populations we serve. A lot of young people move frequently. A lot of city dwellers move frequently. And there still are ways that person can vote. We also are increasingly hearing from community members who are interfacing with the criminal justice system and wondering about their rights to vote. And in Illinois, people can vote even if they have a felony conviction if they have completed their sentence. So if a person has completed their sentence, which would be the case if we're typically if we're going to interact with them in the field, then the Illinois law says that person is eligible to vote, and they may have been taken off of the registration rolls, and we could help them figure out how to register. We commonly get questions about ID. We talked about how people typically will not need an ID to vote in Illinois, and you have more information here and in your documents about forms of acceptable ID. And this is information that election judges should know, and it's important for us to keep it handy too in case there's any confusion or questions. Only one form of ID needs to match a voter's registration address if the voter is even in a situation where they have to produce an ID. If they have an ID with an outdated address, but their registration is intact and they're good to go, then it doesn't matter that their ID has the old address. And an expired ID is not valid for situations where a voter did need to produce identification, like if they're trying to use election day registration. In that instance, it's not sufficient to use an expired ID. This is important to know some basics about voter questions relating to machines being broken. So we should take a note of what type of machine it was, how many people are affected, Are people still able to figure something out? Are most people feeling comfortable with voting a different way? Or is something broken like the ballot scanner that interrupts the whole process? That'll help us gauge the severity of the problem and what to do next. Here are some specific questions that we get to about voter access. And we're partnering with Equip for Equality, MALDEF, and other organizations who really do specialized work in these areas. And many of us will be working together even on election day, but we want all of you to know the basics as well so that you feel comfortable answering voters' questions. Voters who have a disability and physically have an issue at the polling place or have an issue reading a ballot are able to get assistance. We talked earlier, and I know one of the rows in the back answered about what a voter has access to if they need assistance at the polls. And a friend or family member can help that voter. The friend or family member will likely need to fill out an affidavit saying that they're here to just help the voter. They're here to help the voter exercise their choice on the ballot, not for me as an assister to impose my judgment on the ballot. And it's a simple form that an assister would have to fill out, and then they're able to help. An election judge might also be able to help the voter if no one else is available to help. And poll watchers can help the voter too if you're comfortable doing that, and if you feel like it's a situation where that's the best judgment is for you to help the voter. You then have to fill out an affidavit, and I wouldn't say that's your main role on election day, but use your best judgment about whether that seems like the right thing to do, especially if you have a language skill and it's a situation where you could really help to allow the access by not substituting our judgment for the voter, but just simply helping them to fill out the paperwork. And we learned a little bit about the requirements under the Voting Rights Act for language assistance. Ryan mentioned that there are changing demographics and as a result changing civil rights rules about language assistance as required in Illinois. And it's important to know that in an increasing number of areas in Illinois, including most of the places that we will be covering, Spanish language assistance is legally required in all of the jurisdictions, and in most of the jurisdictions that we'll be covering, and that would be translated materials, ballots, and forms, and all of the other materials translated into Spanish, as well as oral assistance through bilingual poll workers that are often required to help people as well. Just having a stack of translated forms doesn't always help voters feel comfortable, and the whole reason for these language access requirements is because these voters who are citizens who are eligible to vote, not necessarily comfortable yet voting in English, have been shown to face voter suppression and disenfranchisement in the past, and that's precisely why, and currently, and that's precisely why these voter access tools are required as a matter of law. And I want to briefly go over what the language access requirements are, even though it's in your materials as well. And I am going to ask my colleague Veronica to mention which counties the Spanish language assistance is federally required. Yeah, so Kane, Lake, DuPage, Cook County, the way the election jurisdictions are, there's a separate election board for City of Chicago and a separate election board for suburban Cook County. And of course, Spanish language assistance is required for both. We also have Chinese language assistance that's required in the City of Chicago and suburban Cook County, and that's translated materials and oral assistance, and translated materials and oral assistance is also required for Hindi in City of Chicago and suburban Cook County, and oral assistance is required in Gujarati and Urdu, which are other South Asian languages in the City of Chicago and suburban Cook County. And regardless of these particularities that depend on jurisdiction and language, anyone, regardless of language group, regardless of what type of disability or health issue it is, any of us could take a friend or family member with us to the poll to help us to vote. Electioneering is not allowed inside the polling place. These are some of the questions that we might get from voters wondering what is and isn't okay. And if a voter is outside the polling place and outside of the cone that you'll see that's 100 feet away from the door to the polling place, then it's fair game for campaign workers to give their literature or to put up signs trying to get a voter, make their last pitch to a voter to choose their candidate. However, that kind of material, whether it's orally, whether it's giving a message out loud to try to convince someone to vote one way or another, or it's handing out literature or wearing a T-shirt or button, that's not allowed inside the polling place or inside the blue cone that you'll see, or whatever color cone it is that you'll see. And that's something we really should keep an eye out for. We want all voters to feel comfortable to vote the way that they want to and not be pressured inside the polling place. And people should not wear a political button or T-shirt when voting, and if they will need to cover it up if they're coming in to vote. We were researching another voter enthusiasm issue, which is about selfies. So we talked about electioneering not being allowed inside the polling place, but selfies of us voting or of a voter voting, it is allowed in the polling place. And so there's been some interesting First Amendment discussion by the courts about this, and it is allowed in the city of Chicago and the other jurisdictions where we will be. People can't take a picture of their ballot or of other people's ballot and how a voter is filling it out. That's not something that's permitted, and that's for voter privacy reasons, even if we're taking the picture of our own ballot. So technically that's not allowed. The city of Chicago, I thought this was funny, they're encouraging people to take a selfie of their wrist instead of a I voted wristband that you get after the fact, and they would rather people do that than have any gray area inside the polling place. But selfies are fine. If you ask me, and if you check the law, then selfies are fine. We already talked in detail about questions that you might have about challenges. And so I won't belabor the point, but it's important to keep in mind the different kinds of things that could happen. We heard from Dan Feeney, one of our volunteer leaders and field captains. We heard from him earlier about some of the things that could come up where we should get our captain involved, call the command center. If we needed to do anything else to ensure our safety, go ahead and do that too. Use your best judgment. And I wanted to tell you about a situation that I got called about from a community member. So this doesn't only happen in the South, or it doesn't only happen in places really far away and distant from our own community. In suburban Cook County, in the municipal elections that were last year, that don't always make their way to the headlines, but are really important nonetheless, and sometimes very highly contested and competitive and even ugly at times. That's sometimes where we can see really intense electioneering and intimidation and pressure, because it can come down to a margin of a few voters that determines whether someone in that municipal position wins or loses. And so it can be a lot at stake for people in that community. And a community member shared with me that a candidate was running for office in that area, and it was of a ward in a Cook County suburb. It's a pretty small area. And the candidate is a police officer, the candidate's spouse is a police officer, and at the main polling place in that ward, there was a line of uniformed police officers standing in front of the polling place on election day, asking voters who came in what their name was and who they intended to vote for. And so that's a really clear example of impermissible voter intimidation. It's not something that reflects what's the norm at all in Chicago or the suburbs or anywhere around here. It's not the norm of what the interaction is like between voters and police officers either. It was a very rare example, but intimidating example nonetheless. Affected the outcome of the race, and that candidate who did use that tactic, whose campaign used the tactic, did prevail and is an elected official now. And we didn't have field volunteers in that suburban municipal election, and maybe we need to in the future. And I think with all of us working together in this capacity in a nonpartisan way, we can have more success going forward as a team. We are going to show you a bit about what the polling place looks like and then go through a few exercises together. So I'd like to bring up again Dan Feeney, who's a partner at Miller Shackman, who you heard is a field captain and has experience with election protection. And we'll all go through this together and then go through a few examples before we conclude today. So anyone should chime in, really, especially Dan and Ryan. So if someone comes into the polling place, there's usually a table where a voter would check in. Here's a sample ballot. You can come and check it out later. Probably a lot of you are used to these ballots where the paper ballots, we have to draw a line in between these bars in order to vote. There are also the touchscreen machines that you heard about. Election judges will be sitting behind the table like Ryan and Dan are. They'll have different voter registration lists, sometimes in electronic form, sometimes in paper form. In some of the jurisdictions, especially, am I correct, in the city of Chicago, there might be separate lines or stations or election judges assigned to regular voting and election day registration. That can help things go smoothly if it's done correctly so that people who are ready to go and are registered correctly don't have to wait in the same line as people who need to show ID and get registered for the first time. However, inevitably, whether there's 2 stations or 1 or however many there are, people still do get confused about it. One way I've tried to be helpful as a poll monitor in the past is if I sense that people are getting confused, giving a friendly suggestion to the election judge about, here's a way that that might work better, or could you have one of your colleagues check people in at the front of the door when they come in and show them how to go in one direction or another so that we're not having people massively confused in line. And
I have
then,
a question.
oh, please, go ahead.
Are all of the people sitting behind the desk election judges, or is there sort of one person who's the most senior person there? Because I remember when I voted in the past, it's always not been obvious to me kind of what each of the people's roles are.
Yes. So, and we as field volunteers should ask if we're not sure. It usually would be election judges who have a badge on that says election judge. It usually will say their party affiliation too, which is different from electioneering, but the Illinois law requires that there's an equal number of Democrat and Republican election judges to ensure fairness. And so usually it'll have their party and just their party, not any other paraphernalia or slogans, but just their party, and then whether they're an election judge and the name. And there are sometimes other equipment specialists and other people who are with the election board who have a different title than election judge, like an equipment manager or something else. So we can ask about that if we're not sure. There also might be poll watchers from other organizations, and they should have credentials just like we do. And they may be with campaigns. They may be with parties. They may not be nonpartisan like we are. Any other question about that, about other people there?
Are the actual election judges to be wearing badges or ID, or is that?
Yes, they would have a badge. It wouldn't necessarily be a photo badge, but it would be a name badge. And actually, they should also have on there, if they speak other languages, that helps the voters be comfortable so that they don't have to especially try to figure out or do detective work about who speaks what language. It should be displayed on there too, especially if it's someone who's bilingual or multilingual. What else comes to mind to Dan or Ryan about what's useful to know about inside the polling place?
It varies. In the polling places I've been in, usually there's a place where there are a bunch of donuts for the workers.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to be staffed at a place where you're going to, and particularly doing the morning shift, I'm not above bringing my own donuts to share with the poll workers when I introduce myself. That's been received fairly well. But they move around. It's a team, and they'll take turns at different spots. Often there's one person who's either officially in charge or is de facto in charge because they've been working that precinct since Truman was in office. So you got to get a feel. There's a lot of interpersonal going on, and there are people who are deferred to, and with keeping your eyes open, you'll get a sense of who the person is to talk to if something arises.
You mentioned phones, chargers, donuts, bags, guidebooks. Can we bring in a bag? I thought I'd heard some kind of rule about bags not allowed. Maybe I'm confusing things.
That's fine. It's fine to bring in a bag. I think you'll have an easier time in the interaction with everyone and just for yourself personally if you don't bring a ton of stuff in with you. But it's fine to bring things in with you. So we're going to move on to a simulation that Dan and Brian will help us with. So let's go for it. Let's practice and show you how all this works when we put it together. So I'm the election judge, and I'm working at the poll.
So we stand over there by that mic?
Yeah, you go over there.
Okay.
I'll walk over to you.
Okay.
Hi, can you help me? I see your shirt says election protection.
I'm happy to help. What can I
Yeah,
do?
so I just got in there. I've been waiting in line for about 15 minutes. It just turned 7. and the election judge says that I can't vote, and there's a bunch of people in line that are just turning us away as soon as it turns 7.
Okay. First of all, don't go anywhere.
Okay.
Let me get your name, and I want to get your address. But actually, before I do that, so we don't lose your spot, the law is, you are correct, that if you're in line by 7 o'clock, you're supposed to vote.
Okay.
So there's probably just a mistake. Let's talk to the election judge first, but don't leave. Did any other voters leave?
I didn't see
when
any
she announced
leave,
that?
no.
Okay, so let's go in and let's go talk to the election judge now. Hi.
Hi.
You remember, I'm Dan Feeney. I'm here with Election Protection.
Yes.
I know it's 7 o'clock now, and there's a line established there. And, under the law, everyone in line at 7 o'clock is supposed to vote. We can put a stopgap at the end of that line now so no one adds to that line. But is that your understanding, too, that everyone in line now gets to vote?
The polls close at 7 p.m. We've been open all day. We've been open since 6. People could have come earlier, and it's 7, so it's closed now.
Yeah, I understand it's been a long day, but it is fairly straightforward under Illinois law that anyone in line by 7 gets to vote. I think you might have that in your manual, too. I would just ask that we keep the people in line now and not kick them out, let them sit there, and maybe you can call the election you can call your supervisor, the election board, find out from them if you can get a ruling on that, and I'll call my people too.
Well, we can't promise people that they can vote because more people are coming in. I don't want to get in trouble from my supervisor. We can't just stay open all night. We have to be fair.
Sure, but if you have why don't you have one of your colleagues go to the end of the line now, and they can tell anybody who joins the line now that it's too late. It's after 7. They can't. That the line is closed. But let's keep those people in line, and let's just make sure, you and I will both make sure we're right about this. Can the people who are in line at 7 vote? And would you be willing to call to do that, and then call your team to find out if that's right?
Okay.
Okay. And then I would just add, that won't always solve the problem, because the next thing you might hear is, it's 7 o'clock, the line's busy, I can't reach anybody at the Board of Elections, well, so I'm closing it down. One of the things that your captain can do, or the control center can do, and we had this the last time, I think we'll have it again, we should have a copy of the election judge's Bible. They have their own manual that's issued by the Board of Elections. And this has been effective in the past. We'll say, okay, go back and tell the election judge, look at page 78 at the bottom of the page, and it says right there, anybody in line at 7 o'clock can vote. So we'll have that resource too. Then I could come back if she's not able to get through and say, could you just open it up? I just talked to my people, downtown, and they said, it's right in your manual on page 78. I can help you find that.
And this is where the partner could help too, in case one person needs to keep an eye on what's happening inside, and you can grab your partner to help get the command center on the phone, whatever else is needed.
And then you should also, now once you've got that corrected so you are not hemorrhaging people in line, if anybody is leaving or in danger of leaving, then you collect their data, call it into the hotline so they can do an incident report.
Mm-hmm. That'd be great. So stay put here. And
Okay.
last but not least, it's your turn. So take a look at these, pair up with someone near you, and think through what your answers would be to these questions that come up from voters at the poll. Let's just take 5 minutes to think about how you'd tackle it. And look through the documents if you need to. Again, you don't have to have it memorized.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the personal ID. I think I saw two of those counts, but not on election day, but the bill is good ID.
Yeah, I don't know.
You gotta look at the list, but
That might be
regardless, two, right? Regardless, you need an ID.
Yeah, number 2.
Cover it. Where
inside out and had to, worst things first, you count the jacket, turn it inside out, it'll be all right. We got a election day registration. Registered there on election day registration line. As long as they have ID, then they have to have ID for that. That's a good question. You register for the precinct. I think you're permitted to vote on other precinct more if you don't live there, even though you said you can, like, oh, okay. In a certain period of time, you can still vote in the old precinct. Yeah, you can. In a certain period of time.
I think it's just.
Yeah, 6. So, question 6.
We didn't give you very much time, but it's a smart bunch. Let's move on. So I'd love to hear from any volunteers about how to approach the first type of question, keeping in mind that the reason that this backstory is listed here is because usually you'll get an incomplete sort of question or sometimes a stressed out statement from someone who's probably really busy, has work or family commitments, and you may not get the whole story, so we do need to interact a bit to draw out the fuller picture. So how would we tackle number 1? Anyone? Chime in and turn on your microphone.
Who is the person? Is the person that you're encountering on election day, or is that a call?
These are all voters on election day that field volunteers are encountering.
I think if they voted in the precinct, probably get more information. Primary or
Yes, that's great. That's really helpful. And we would want to make sure, sometimes we get the questions because people don't know. It may not be even that they ran into an issue. They may ask us when they're coming in and just be confused or stressed out and mixing up our state's rules with other places and not being sure. And if they had their wallet stolen yesterday, they're probably stressed out about that too. So don't assume that it's a problem necessarily until we get a little more information, but if they have voted in the precinct before, it should be fine. So letting them know to that they should be able to vote. If you do have a problem, let me know as a field volunteer. I can call someone to get it sorted out, or I can talk to the election judge before even the person goes through the hassle of trying to call election protection themselves. So that's great. How about the next one? Voter is wondering if they're campaigning, and by the way, that's a presidential candidate, in case you didn't know, if they're wondering if that T-shirt is a problem. Yes, please, turn on your mic and share with us your thoughts.
I'm sorry, Ami, going back to number 1,
sure.
even in the polls, when people sign, the judges do compare signatures, so that shouldn't be that much of a problem when they sign their ballot. So they'll look up the signature, and if they compare it, it shouldn't be a
right, even though you're saying that because they have to sign in and not show an ID, even though the wallet was stolen, it should be all right because that signature is already saved with in the voter rolls that the election judge has.
Yes.
Right, that makes sense completely. Yeah, that's a good clarifying point, that the signature comparison I was talking about, it's not the signature on the ID that they compare it against. It's a signature they have in their records from the original voter registration that the voter put in. How about the T-shirt, the Vote for Stein T-shirt? If a voter asked you if it's going to be a problem, how would you respond to the voter?
Not a problem as long as they just put a jacket over it or just turn it inside out, but they can still vote that day. They just can't be seen.
That sounds great. And I think that's a good point too, that we're not doing this training to cause any of you to get hung up on the legal details or to try to give a legal research answer to the voter. We want to give a practical answer and make people feel comfortable, really, to be able to proceed with what they're doing in a proper way, cover up the T-shirt, but please, we still want to encourage them to vote, regardless of who's on their T-shirt. And how about for the last one? So if a voter tells you that the election judges say, I'm not on the list here, so the voter probably already went into the polling place and then it comes out and talks to you outside. And then you do a little more digging and find out that the voter used to live in another precinct in that county. What would you do to try to, even if you don't know the answer, what would you do to try to figure it out, to attempt to figure out what to do on election day? Please.
You would ask them when they moved, because if it was in the past 30 days, they could go to the old one, or they could do election day registration.
That's right. So you would want to ask some more questions to find out when they moved, make sure they know about election day registration. The election judges should also know about election day registration. So it's sometimes a matter of connecting people and saying, and even walking the person over to the election judge and saying, this person seems like they might need to know more about where the correct polling place is or how to use election day registration. And so we're going to go over how that might play out if that happened and some more facts that might unfold when we ask some more questions like we should be doing. So if I'm a voter in this situation and I tell you, the field volunteer, that the poll workers say that I'm not on the list. I just tried to vote, but I don't know why I'm not on the list.
Okay. Have you voted here before?
No, I used to vote somewhere else, but I moved.
Okay. When did you move?
6 months ago.
Okay. Before you came here today, did you go online and make sure that this is the correct voting place?
So I checked online to see where my polling place is. I used Chicago Board of Elections website.
Great, and you just typed in your home address.
I put in my address. I didn't put in my name, but I put in my address to see where the polling place is, and I thought it was here.
Okay, so that's right. Then you should be able to vote here. If you have your ID on you and a credit card, do you have that on you?
Yes.
Okay, then you can just go to the registration table, and you can register to vote here today and vote at the same time.
Great, thank you. The other thing to remember is that you don't have to have it memorized like Ryan does, and you can use your materials. You can use your FAQ and even better yet, the top issues document to try to guide you through that. And the voter might want to look at it too. The election judge might want to look at it too. Don't be surprised if other people find these materials to be helpful, and it's fine. Share it with people. You have extra copies. It's available online. You'll get all those links and everything too. In case you wanted to know a short way to tell people, in case they're interested and want to share it with their friends or colleagues, these materials are at 866-OUR-VOTE/state/IL for Illinois. So you'll get those links later, but just in case other people are finding those tools to be useful as well, so your friends and colleagues might also. So let's go ahead and wrap up today's training. We talked about how our goal together, and really the reason we can do this work, is because we have literally hundreds of volunteers who are taking the time to ensure that every eligible voter has the chance to cast a ballot that counts and make their voice known on election day. We're coming together, people across different backgrounds and different reasons why we're interested in civic engagement, and probably different people we're going to vote for president, and it's really great we're working together. Make sure that you be assertive. A lot is at stake on election day. Be assertive when you're talking to the election judge, when you're talking to a voter who probably needs someone on their side and needs a boost of confidence about what they're trying to do. and be assertive and constructive at the same time. Try to think about it from a problem-solving point of view. For yourselves, and I need to do this too, vote early if you can, please. We don't want to deprive you of your right to vote because you're busy volunteering with us for a huge chunk of election day. And so please vote early if you can. It's good too to get the experience and see all the equipment and everything. You all probably have voted before and are familiar, but take a look at the early voting options, or let us know if you have any questions about that.
Yeah, if you live in Cook County or...
Can you turn the mic on?
Oh, sure. If you live in Cook County or in Chicago, you can go to the county building, which is across from Daley Plaza. It's the yellow building, and they have a lot of voting machines in there. And I think the city also has taken over an old Walgreens that's just down Washington Street from there, heading toward the lake on the south side of the street. And they have a ton of electronic voting machines there. So those are good options for you. They're open every business day and on the weekends as well, I think.
And if anyone wants to know more about early voting options, if you live outside of the city, want to know more specifics, we can help you with that. Make sure to be at your shift on time. You'll get the details about location from your captain. We usually send those assignments to people a few days before the election, but be in touch with us if you have any questions. And, your shift is a long period of time, and it'll allow you enough time to get to the different locations that you need to during your shift. The location would be within the place you signed up for. Like, it would be within City of Chicago or within suburban Cook County or within DuPage or Lake. And so if you have any other questions, let us know. But otherwise, expect to receive an email at the latest a few days before Election Day from your field captain. And it's important to know that correct is better than quick. It's important for us to give election judges and voters accurate information. And when in doubt, please, go ahead.
Will you also give us the names of kind of who's working the other shift for those poll locations? So when you're doing the transition, you're kind of, here's what I've seen so far this morning, and that kind of thing?
That's a good question. The most important thing is that we will give you, that you will need to know, is the name of your partner so that people can coordinate the logistics of that, work together as a team. We're happy to give the information of who else will be tackling that area later in the day or earlier in the day, but also it might be different. It might be entirely different locations or different circumstances. And so also the field captain will help to keep that communication going. So it might be a little bit of both. It may be that if, depending on the density of the volunteers and the placement and the specific concerns in that area, it may be that volunteers need to report to each other and fill each other in. You might be able to identify each other with the t-shirts or with information that we send you. But when in doubt, and if you felt like something important did need to be conveyed, you can also have a field captain help you with that. Does that sound right? And when in doubt on Election Day, call your field captain. This is the phone number of how you can get to them, 312-553-8380. You also can call 866-OUR-VOTE to get transferred to the field captain, but it just might take a longer process. And Michael, do you have a thought about that too?
I did, not a thought, but two questions, one for clarity. In regards to the monitors who are, when you go to a precinct, is it one monitor per organization, or is it one monitor allowed in a precinct at a time?
Good question. It's one poll monitor allowed with a credential per organization, per nonpartisan civic organization. And so your credential, if you have one, if you don't, then please check in with our table before you leave, because the City of Chicago, suburban Cook County, and Lake County credentials are already here and ready for you. If you're volunteering in a different area, we'll have to connect up with you, and we'll likely be mailing it to you so that you have it to take with you. But the credential has the name on top of our organization, Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and the law is that for a nonpartisan civic organization like ours, it's one person from our organization, which is one of you, per precinct at a given time. So over a day, it might be multiple people because our folks are coming in and out. Does that answer your question?
Second question, in regards to people requiring assistance, you mentioned an affidavit. Where does that affidavit come from?
The affidavit would be with the election judge. In some places it's called Form 1, but don't worry if you don't remember that number. It might be called a different number somewhere else. But it's a simple form that someone would fill out saying, I affirm that I am helping this person vote of their own free will and not trying to force them to vote for who I want them to vote for. Fun fact about that form is that when the language access requirements for Hindi were first instituted a few years ago, the form was translated with the good intentions to comply with the civil rights laws, but it was translated by a vendor incorrectly who used Google Translate to try to do it quickly and then charged the government for it. And there was some really gross mistranslations in that form saying things like, I affirm that I have not raped this voter instead of coerced this voter. So that's why our voting rights advocacy is so important, to try to correct those kind of details so that people feel comfortable using these tools. And you won't see that kind of terrible mistranslation anymore in Hindi in Chicago. I think we had another question in the back.
Yeah, so, whoa, that was loud. Crap. When I registered to vote, I got a voter registration card in the mail. Does that have any purpose whatsoever? And what if we get questions about those?
Yeah, good question. It's only for our own convenience as voters. It's not necessary to take it in. The one reason that I find it useful sometimes is because it has the precinct number, and I go to this church down the street that has multiple precincts in it, and so then I know which line to go in right away, because otherwise I'm not going to remember what precinct I'm in. But it's not necessary for you to take. It's meant to be a friendly reminder and a reference for someone to remind them to vote, remind them of where to go, what their precinct is, but it's not required. It also could help if there was a situation where a voter happens to have that with them. It's not a requirement, but if they happen to have that with them, the election judge is saying they're not registered here, that's a very easy way to try to clear it up, basically, if they just show that. Question?
Yeah, do you have a suggestion of where to stand, whether inside or outside, or does that not matter?
No, it does matter, and we should do both. And so when we are there in pairs, one person should be inside the polling place, the other person can be outside. If the election judge is not being strict about saying one poll monitor per organization per precinct, then both of you can be in there. It might be cold. You know, it's okay. Do what it feels practically feasible.
But within it, does it matter?
Say that again?
What within the room, does it matter where we're standing?
It's good to stand as close enough to the situation so that you can hear and see what's going on. You don't want to hover over an election judge or voter and make them feel uncomfortable, but so I think all of us would tend to want to give space and be respectful, but if we're too far away and we don't know what's going on, then we can't detect any kind of problems. So figure out that balance. And election judges sometimes will on their own be assertive about it and say, I want you to be over here. Listen to that. If it makes sense to stand there or sit there, then that's fine. There may even be a chair for you, there may not. But it's also okay for us to push back a bit in a friendly way and say, oh, I'm actually going to be over here because I wanted to chat with you a little bit more about how it's going, or, let me know if I can be over here, but I know my coat's taking up some space, I'll move that over there. Just, those normal kinds of interactions that can help to put everyone at ease. We're not permitted to see how a voter votes. I know that's obvious, but just an election judge may not know that we know that. So we'll make it clear we're respecting the voter's privacy, but we still want to see what's going on. Does that help to give the lay of the land? These are great questions. What other questions do people have?
Do you have any suggestions one way or the other, or even if it's advisable the example you gave before about people being in line and maybe being turned away, to address that problem before it even crops up?
I think that it's always good to do that. That's what we do in our work, and that's what all of the field volunteers should do as well. If we see that it's 6:45 and there's a crowd and we're hearing, by then we've been in our shift for a while. We should know the election judges at that point. I would probably know their names by then, had chatted with them a bit, not when they're super busy, but maybe when there's some downtime, and figure out what are they planning. And the default would be to think that they understand the rules. But if you're hearing people say, oh, we're going to lock the door at 7 or something else like that, that doesn't quite make sense to you, then tease it out a bit, have some back and forth, and figure out what their plan is if we can see that problem mounting in advance. And that also will give us more time to get a field captain involved or ask our volunteer partner to tackle something while we're inside the polling place with the election judge. All of that's more possible if we anticipate those issues. And the high times when we usually see a lot of voters is first thing in the morning. The polls open at 6 a.m., so 6 to 8 or so, 6 to 9 could be really busy. in the evening, 5 to 7 is busy. For some neighborhoods, some people, the lunch hour is busy as well. And so in the off times, your volunteer work is still really important because you might be able to pick up on what's going well that day, what didn't go well that day, strike up a conversation about what happened earlier, how did it go. You might even learn of some things that happened before your shift that may be worth delving into a little bit more. Any other questions? Any questions about the credentials or logistics or anything else?
I just wanted to mention one thing I guess we haven't covered. If you're experiencing long lines, and by long lines, probably a wait of 30 minutes might make sense to report up, but definitely if it's extended and getting longer, an hour, we saw with same-day registration at the midterm, we saw 3.5, 4-hour lines at the same-day registration sites. Definitely let us know, because the election officials can dispatch more resources in situations like that, if they can extend the voting time at particular polling places, if there's a reason to do so. So that's one other thing to monitor. Don't call the captain every 5 minutes to give an update on that, but if you're seeing a long line, let them know that particular, one particular precinct is having trouble with that.
Absolutely. That's another kind of problem to anticipate and try to address head on. There are times that things can be reconfigured in the room, whether it's more staffing, getting the election board involved to send more staffing, or change the way that election judges are configured so that the flow is better. If it is election day registration that's holding up the process, splitting it up so that other people who are ready to go and who are registered aren't waiting in the same line. I mean, common sense, things like that. I've seen some places where election judges are really on top of things and have innovative ideas about how to get some people started with signing in or doing other things to prepare while they're waiting in line. So by observing and by interacting with the people in the room, often you'll be able to figure out a good solution. And sometimes, because of high turnout and voter excitement, there are long lines, and sometimes we won't have the answer or the solution for people. But we can help and let people know we're with election protection. We called this in. We're seeing if there's anything we can do. I bet that a voter would be reassured in that situation to maybe stick it out. Any other questions? Thank you all for your time today, and thank you so much for volunteering with us.